Okay, this morning we're continuing with Bhagavad-gita. Bhagavad-gita Chapter 2, text number 14, and we've called it or entitled it, You Get What You Get, Don't Get Upset. Hopefully, though, that title will be relevant as we get into it. We move into it. We will begin by offering our respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavad-gita Chapter 2, text number... Oh my gosh. It's me. Advance. Everything's very tricky. Here we go. This is perfect verse for the perfect example. It just happened because it says Matra sparshasta kunteya sitoshna sukha dukkada agama paino nityastam statikshasva bharataha. The translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In the proper discharge of duty, one has to learn to tolerate non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. According to Vedic injunction, one has to take his bath early in the morning, even during the month of Magh, January, February, in the northern hemisphere. It is very cold at that time, but in spite of that, a man who abides by the religious principles does not hesitate to take his bath. Similarly, a woman does not hesitate to cook in the kitchen in the months of May and June, northern hemisphere, the hottest part of the summer season. One has to execute his duty in spite of climatic inconveniences. Similarly, to fight is the religious principle of the Kshatriyas, and although one has to fight with some friend or relative, one should not deviate from his prescribed duty. One has to follow the prescribed rules excuse me, and regulations of religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge. I'm just going to say that once more. One has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge. Because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate himself from the clutches of Maya, or illusion. The clutches of Maya rang in my brain. Clutches. Usually if we use that, the clutches, it means some ferocious animal of such and such, the clutches. Or we're captured by something, so we use it. So this is the clutches of Maya or illusion. Continuing, the two different names of address given to Arjuna are also significant. To address Arjuna as Kuntiya signifies his great blood relations from his mother's side, and to address him as Bharat signifies his greatness from his father's side. From both sides, he is supposed to have a great heritage. A great heritage brings responsibility in the matter of proper discharge of duties. Therefore, he cannot avoid fighting. Om Magana Timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Shachuran Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Grave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master is forcing me to open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto his lotus feet. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktavedanta Swamini Tirani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nevasesha Sunyavadi Paschachyadesh Dharane Panchakalpa Taribhischa Kripasindabevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Brinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Matra Sparshasta Kunteya, Sitoshna Sukha Dukkada, Agama Paino Nityastam Statikshasva Bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O skin of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So I may have mentioned last week even, or the week before, that one of the most fundamental verses that we learn, this light of this thing's flashing on and off. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to move. I think it's the sun coming through, and I'm just going to move. Please forgive me for a second, and I'll just get a better place where we're not getting the sun coming through, if that's possible. It might be, hopefully. That might be hopefully a little better. It was interesting as I was jumping around and continuing to jump around, I'm thinking, happiness and distress. And it arises from sense perception. So the light's good, I'm happy. The light's not good, I'm unhappy. It's temporary. So this is the message, the fundamental message of Bhagavad-gita. And isn't it amazing that we see how Krishna begins his instructions in Bhagavad-gita. Arjuna is doing a lot of talking prior to this point, and he's pouring out his heartfelt feelings of how difficult his situation is and how he can't continue. And Krishna hears him patiently, and then it's mentioned that he smiles as Arjuna finally gets to the point where he says, Sishyastiham sarimam tvam prapanam. Now I am surrendered to you. I am taking the position, I'm shifting from friendship to being your sishya or disciple. And I want you to tell me what is best for me. I can't deal with the challenge that I'm faced with. So then Krishna very quickly, Prabhupada points out, Srila Prabhupada points out that he begins by chastising him. You're speaking learned words, by speaking learned words, you're mourning for that which is not worthy of grief. The wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. And then he goes, that brings back, it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation. So you've been speaking, but actually you're fool number one, Srila Prabhupada says. You're mourning for that which is not worthy of grief. So Krishna takes us pretty quickly, in fact, immediately to the transcendental platform. And as I mentioned prior to this also, that Krishna is never in the small picture. We are. We have a very small perspective, and due to that focus into the minutiae of the material world, we get caught up in the small activities, and then we hanker and lament to adjust that situation in different ways. But Krishna, when he begins to speak, it's absolute. So he says, here's how it is, Arjuna. You're mourning for that which is not worthy of grief. The wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. And he goes to next, straight into, so it's like everything's changed here in this these verses uh, let me see, from verse 11 to 12. He goes straight in. Never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. What a text that is. So Krishna's grabbed his attention, the attention of all of us, and is putting in front of us that here's the reality. There's never been a time that you did not exist, nor me, nor everyone that's assembled here, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. Wow, enter a new way of perceiving the world. So we are eternal. We don't die. We're not slain as the body is slain. Next words from Krishna. As the embodied soul, that's us, passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age. Oh, interesting. The soul similarly passes. So Krishna is now introducing this other dimension that goes beyond this temporary body. He's saying, you can see this if you just passes from childhood or boyhood, childhood to youth to old age. And if we think about that for a moment, we see that it's true. This is a fact. It's not a belief. It's not a concocted speculation, but it's a fact. Whether you're a Christian, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, the fact is there that we move. The embodied entity experiences life as a child, life as a youth, middle age, and old age. And then Krishna introduces this to broaden beyond that. So he's broadened. Usually we think, I'm a child, I'm a youth, I'm a middle-aged person. But Krishna is saying quickly, he says, from childhood to youth to old age. So he's covered all that. And now he introduces this wonderful thing. He says, similarly, the soul passes into another body at death. Wow. The self-realized, and then he explains, who can understand this? The self-realized soul can understand all of this, and they're not bewildered by such a change called death. For everyone else, it's a great mystery. But for the self-realized soul, there's no bewilderment because he's understanding by dint of transcendental knowledge, by dint of connection to that absolute platform of spiritual existence, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then everything becomes revealed just as the sun reveals everything in the daytime. So much Krishna said in 3 short statements, 3 verses, and now he explains the amazing condition for all of us that we're all seeking happiness. That's the nature of the soul, is to be blissful, fully blissful. And Krishna's addressing the fact that in the material world, there's a non-permanent appearance of happiness and a non-permanent appearance of distress. And it happens, and he gives this wonderful example of it. It's just like the winter and summer seasons. The summer appears, and then it disappears in due course of time. And misery of winter season, the pinching cold and discomforture, depending on what part of the world we're in at different times. We get all the seasons. So Krishna is very kind. It kind of happens over a period of time. And the happiness and distress is experienced, and Krishna again goes further and he says, this happiness and distress arises from sense perception. Introduces a whole concept that generally the sleeping conditioned soul is not aware of, that there is a group of senses. We don't, this is called the, what is it called? The Sankhya, to count, to analyze, to try to understand through careful analysis what is what. So Lord Kapila, we know, explains that in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Krishna is explaining it here in a summarized way. that this experience of happiness and distress, it arises from sense perception. So just like if someone says to you, "Oh, Krishna Das, oh, Jayasila Das, you're a wonderful person. We love to listen to your class. It's really wonderful." And I'm thinking, I'm happy. That makes me happy. Somebody says, "Jayasila Das, you are a pain in the neck, and I don't really like to listen to your class." We're immediately distressed. Why? Because we've heard something through our ears. The senses have perceived through sound something which causes us happiness and distress. And if we look at it, it's the same. We taste something, it's sweet, we think, oh no, it's nice. Or we taste something that's bitter or rotten or something, it gives us distress. Uh, we see something that appears very beautiful, we're pleased, we like the sun's rising, I'm looking at the sun up here. The sun's there, I'm happy, it's sun. And then the sun disappears and we become unhappy because now it's darker or it's raining and it becomes cold. So now I'm distressed. So Krishna is explaining all this and he says one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Wow. That's not an easy thing. Or is it easy? Maybe it is easy. But Krishna is introducing this. He's saying one must learn to tolerate these non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress without being disturbed. So this is the introduction to the whole system of yoga. In Bhagavad-gita later on, I think it's towards the end of the 6th chapter, Srila Prabhupada explains that more or less the yoga process, whether it's hatha yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, whether it's bhakti yoga, it more or less depends on the ability to control the senses. Because if we are not able to do that, we become very disturbed. So more or less, this is the process. Apuryamana machala pratistam samudramapa pravashanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravashanti sharve shashantim apnoti nakama kamai. Krishna also, towards the end of this chapter, explains that, what is that? English translation, how does it begin? I think I'll see if I can find it even. Just a person, hold on, is it just towards the end? I think it is. Apuryamana machala pratistam samudramapa pravashanti advat. Yes, here we are. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter, like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled, but it's always still. So the ocean's ever being filled, the rivers are flowing into the ocean, so it's ever being filled, but it always remains still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So this whole chapter is discussing, a lot of it is discussing how this process is going on, how this happiness and distress comes and goes, the desires to enjoy happiness in the world are constantly flowing, just like the rivers that are flowing into the ocean. And that Krishna is explaining that one can achieve that happiness by not striving to satisfy all these different desires. In another place, Krishna is explaining in this chapter also, he's saying that the intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise person does not delight in such things. So this is called transcendental knowledge, and we begin to broaden our perspective from our very focused identity of ahankara or false ego, which is telling us I am a man or woman, I am this, I am that, so many identities in this world, and that through sense connection, I can find happiness. I think it's just in a few verses later, Krishna is explaining that also, that there can be no happiness unless there's peace. And how can there be peace if there's no focus? I think it's 220 maybe? Maybe. Is it? Maybe. Is it no, that's not the one. It's just, I can't remember the number of the verse. I'm pretty sure it's in this chapter, that it says, one who is not in transcendental consciousness. Nasti buddhirna yuktasya, nacha yuktasya bhavana, nachaya bhavashanti, ashantasya kuta sukham. One who is not in transcendental consciousness can neither have a controlled mind nor steady intelligence, without which there's no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So it's a wonderful verse that explains that we're searching for the happiness, but you can't be happy without being peaceful. You can't be peaceful if your mind's not controlled, and you can't have a controlled mind. Or how to get a controlled mind? Through steady intelligence. Your intelligence has to be fixed. You have to be clear to not be swayed everywhere with the mind, because the mind is attached to the senses. This is the way it's done. It's an amazing creation. Mamaivam sajiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manasastani indriyani prakriti stani karshiti. Krishna says that the six senses, including the mind, the living entity, is encaged by those things. So the sixth sense, we've got the five senses, and we've got the sixth sense, which is the mind, around which all the other senses are grouped. And the mind's business is to accept whatever the senses have brought to it for approval or disapproval. It can accept or reject. So the senses see something beautiful or something wonderful. The mind says, yes, I like it. So that's the business of the mind. This is good for sense gratification, and this is not. There's no intelligence. We've given the example often of when you're eating, for example, you could have eaten a whole big feast, and someone comes in and says, oh, we forgot this preparation. It's a big strawberry cake or a big carrot cake or whatever it may be. And we're thinking, wow, like, oh, I wish I could eat that. The mind saying, I like it, I want it, I want it. And the intelligence is trying to figure out, oh, is this a good idea? So there's a difference between the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. And then the intelligence gets overpowered by the mind. You stuff a big piece of that lovely, fabulous, beautiful, tasty cake, and then you blow it. And you think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Who's speaking now? The intelligence. And possibly the mind starting. The mind is just totally outrageous. The mind's gone from that position, and it's saying, yes, whatever it's saying. Who cares what the mind's saying? So you get the idea. It goes on and on. It doesn't stop. So this sense perception around the mind brings us this appearance of happiness and distress in so many aspects. So we've been advised then to find happiness. We have to learn that we are neither the senses nor the mind, neither we the intellect, but we are the actual passenger in this vehicle of the body. And we have turned over the power of attorney to our mind and uncontrolled senses. And that picture is given in Bhagavad-gita. It's the chariot is there. We have the 5 horses, which are the senses. We have the reins, which are described to be like the mind. And we've got the driver, who is the intelligence. And there's a passenger on this chariot, and he's asleep pretty much. And it's just going on. This power of attorney has been signed. He's signed it over to the misguided intelligence, the uncontrolled mind and senses, and he's going hither and thither all over the place, experiencing this happiness, distress, happiness, and on and on and on through all the species of existence. So Krishna begins to explain this to Arjuna very rapidly, and then he goes back into it, because as he's explaining in the 2nd chapter, Arjuna is trying to pick it up, and illumination's coming, but then he becomes a little confused, and then he has to ask more questions to get it more elaborately described, the process. And at one point in the 6th chapter, we see where Arjuna says, this process that you're explaining is very difficult to do, this process of yoga, to bring oneself through to higher levels of awareness and control. And he says, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna, mana, this mind. To control the mind is like trying to control the raging wind. I think it's too difficult. I don't think it's possible. So it's a very powerful statement that it's like trying to control the wind, and it's not an easy thing to do, to control the mind and the senses. And then Krishna replies to Arjuna, and he says, Asamsayam Mahabaho. It is undoubtedly Mahabaho, the mighty armed Arjuna. It is undoubtedly very difficult to control the mind. So he agrees with Arjuna. Then he says, but it is possible. It is possible by what? By detachment and constant practice. So this is a very important factor. It's not going to happen overnight. We didn't get into this mess that we're in overnight. It took a while, and we kept going and going and going. We've wandered into the forest of enjoyment. And if you go into a forest, if you're not very careful, you think, oh, I'll just go into the forest and I can come back out. Nice idea. Great idea. And Krishna's pretty much in favor of that. Okay, you have to do this. You go and do this. It's okay. We'll create this illusion for you. It's called the material world, where you'll think this and think that. You'll experience this and that, and you can come back out. That's your idea. But we wander in, and we get trapped. We get lost along the way, and we think, oh, it's this way, it's that way. I can move this way, that way, and we go further and further into the forest of material enjoyment until we're described as Nityabada, practically since time immemorial, been wandering around. Now that seems like a long time, but time immemorial is simultaneously 1 second. Why? How is that possible? Because we're dealing with the absolute. The absolute, you can take everything away from the absolute truth, and you're left with the absolute truth. In absolute sense, time is short and long. It's absolute. For example, we hear about the Purusha avatars. So Lord Krishna, in the form of Karanadakshayi Vishnu, he lies down in the causal ocean, and from his transcendental body, unlimited universes are manifesting. This is the scale of things. Again, on the absolute platform, our tiny little brains can, oh, what is that? And we think, oh yeah, I got a picture of that. Yep. And that's what Prabhupada wanted the art department to depict all these things. And we see that Karanadakshayi Vishnu and the universes are coming out. So the time scale, that's the factor we're looking at here. The time scale, it is one breath of the Mahavishnu. One breath. All of those universes are coming into existence. They're expanding. Lord Brahma is appearing. All the planetary systems within that universe. And then in the one inhalation, it is all just absorbed again into the body of that Purusha avatar. And then there are partial devastations within each universe, where Lord Brahma, at the end of his day, after millions and trillions of years, he goes to sleep. There's partial. This is the size. So our term of imprisonment here is a colossal amount of time, and we feel that sometimes. At the same time, it is not even mentionable. It's a fraction of a second. So Krishna is encouraging Arjuna that this realization may take a little time. It will require detachment, and I'll train you, I'll tell you, I'll explain to you how to do that. And it will require, what was it, like a practice. It will require practice to do something. So practice means that it will be not perfect. You will try to practice and you will not be able to do it so well. And you need to practice more. Practice, practice, practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. And then we hear the great acharyas, the Goswamis of Vrindavan. We're scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures for the benefit of all humanity. And they're giving us the essence of all those literatures for our upliftment. And they're able to explain to us the processes that one should be enthusiastic, and that's what happens. And that was one of the points I was thinking it would be important to make today, is that to do all of this, I'm going to another section, but it's all good, I think, I hope. It comes to mind that other verse that Krishna says to want to progress in this path, we have to get a higher taste. Yes, so we're hearing about, I was about to explain, and I will explain a little bit more about how we have to practice, but it can sound pretty tough. You know, it's a big job. That's trying to control the mind, the senses, and so on. And it's through practice. But to take up that practice, one has to get that higher taste. Param Drishvanavartate, we hear. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. That's natural because you've still got your senses, you've still got your mind, and the proclivity, the propensity for the mind and senses to connect with the sense objects. This taste for sense objects still remains. But by ceasing such engagements, okay, I've got to cease to engage. And then the key words, by experiencing a higher taste, one can remain fixed in this consciousness. So I want the higher taste. Give me the higher taste. And every single one of us has experienced that higher taste of Krishna consciousness. That's why we're reading Bhagavad-gita and we continue to chant Hare Krishna. But the thing that we have to get clear is you have to get that higher taste again and again and again. We have to get it. Because if we don't get the higher taste, guess what? We're going to go for the lower taste. You have to get taste. That is the nature of a sentient being. We must connect to pleasure. And if we don't get higher pleasure, we'll get lower pleasure. So that is one of the biggest pitfalls in our devotional life. It calls to us, oh, I had a higher taste for a while. It was pretty good. And then somehow I'm not getting this taste, and we get attracted to something in this world, and we're not so strict on following the path that is given to us by the acharyas and the Supreme Lord himself. One should learn to tolerate these things without being disturbed. How can you do that? By the process of bhakti yoga, by chanting, by hearing, by associating, by all the processes of devotional service, by observing the festivals, by only eating Krishna prasadam, by thinking of Krishna, everything you do for Krishna. Yeah, because we think, oh, everything for Krishna. This is not the higher taste. I want the taste. Hey, we understand. That's how you get the taste, by doing everything for Krishna. Yeah. So, point being, we have to organize our life in such a way that we get the higher taste. And if we're not getting the higher taste, red flag. So what do we do when there's a red flag, not getting the higher taste? Then we try and see, well, why is it I'm not getting this higher taste? And how can I reconnect? How can I make adjustments? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, our great acharya, our great-great-grandfather, acharya, he was such a wonderful personality and example to us. How to get that higher taste. He says, be introspective. That's the nature of a devotee. He says, unless we Paramahamsas, you will need to be careful to make sure that 4 things are happening properly in your life. What a wonderful gift. He says 4 things are there. You have to, if you're not a Paramahamsa, Paramahamsa means that you transcended this physical and mental and intellectual. You're on the spiritual platform fully. But if you're not at that stage, put your hand up. So that's all of us. We pretty much. Then we need 4 things. We need to make sure that our body is in good health, because if you're not, And Srila Prabhupada obviously explained like that, in pursuance of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teachings, that the body has to be kept healthy. So your body you have to look after in a proper way, in a healthy way. We have to make sure we're eating the right things. We're following the proper ways to keep our body healthy. And then second one is we need to have proper mental stimulus. The mind has to be satisfied. It has to have activities that it will be satisfied with in relationship to Krishna consciousness. So we have to again make sure that we are in a situation which is satisfying enough to the mind that, yes, I like doing this service, or I'm inspired to do this. I've got something I'm looking forward to. That's the way the mind is functioning. So we shouldn't pamper the mind or follow every dictate of the mind, but we have to use our intelligence to see that just as we have a physical body that has to be satisfied properly, we have a mind, and the mind has its positions, very, very important, most important of all the senses. So the mind has to be guided into activities that will be satisfying for a wholesome condition as devotees. So physically, mentally, that's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's instruction. And then the third one he explains is the social well-being. One has to be in a proper ashram according to psychophysical nature at a specific time in his or her life and the circumstances that you're surrounded by. So that is important. One should be properly situated, married or unmarried, in a social environment which gives you the kind of support that you require. And that's very important. And I could go on about that. There's an airplane. I get distracted by sound. There's an airplane up above. Don't think you'll be able to hear it, but it's amazing how the senses bring happiness and distress. So I'm hearing that. I'm not unhappy because it's making a noise. Tolerate it without being disturbed. Oh, okay. I'll try my best. Not easy, but that's what Krishna's saying. So it's fading. So now I can be happy again. Isn't it amazing? It's actually fading. It's blissful. Going away. Lovely. Thank you. Now I'm happy. Isn't it ridiculous? So that was the third point. And the fourth point is the performance of our sadhana, the performance of the different angas of devotional service that is directly connected to Krishna. So that has to be there. Absolutely. And the tendency we see is to, because we're not experienced so much, we hear you have to look after your body, and everyone, or not everyone, but lots of us, we think, yes, I've got to look after my body. So we go off and we're just totally absorbed in the body, and we forget about the dedication to the other aspects. So they're there to support that all important aspect, which is they're all important, absolutely, is the performance of devotional activities. So these things have to be in place to be properly situated so that we actually get the taste. And we'll find when we're not getting the taste, something is out of synchronization, out of balance. So what do I have to do? Do I have to reach out more to connect with more devotees? Am I getting too kind of isolated? Or am I doing too much socialization and I'm just not getting really focused on my sadhana? Am I focusing too much on my body in different ways? And there's so many ways you can do that, passively or actively. Am I just getting into pumping up to get strong muscles and running, for the triathlon or whatever the heck it may be? You can get too far out there, or am I too sedentary and I'm just making sure I'm eating all the foods, but I'm eating too much? There's so many ways for the body and the mind and so on. So back to Thakur's instruction, we should be introspective, just always checking in. How are things balancing nicely? So that, and am I getting the higher taste? So it's been a difficult time. I've mentioned it different times, this lockdowns, COVID, and this and that, whatever it may be, can affect us and throw us right out in so many ways. So especially the association of devotees, is maybe being restricted in different ways. So there's many ways we can do that. I know personally, I've been closer to a computer screen over the last period of time, and I'm taking advantage, as many others do, of finding those streams of Krishna consciousness by watching videos of persons that I can feel. And you can choose. There's so many types of people, and that are speaking and giving lectures and classes and so on and so forth, that can fortify our devotional life and give us the nectar for which we are always anxious. So it's so important to do that. So and that's the nature of the world. Mothers know that, for example. Mothers know that things change. They experience it, with men do too, for sure. But I'm just thinking of that example of a mother. The child is very close to the mother. And just as the mother's getting it down, meaning knowing how to look after that 3-month-old child, it becomes a 4, 5, 6-month child, becomes a year-old child, and it changes. It's always changing. What things you had to do for the child have changed, and you have to adjust and adapt, and then gain re-inspiration. I was failing in certain ways, things were becoming overwhelming, but now I've made adjustment. I've got a bit more help, or I've moved in this way and that way. I've made these arrangements. So this is the material world. It's not the spiritual world. And I know I do it all the time. I fall into the trap. I want it to be steady, predictable, dependable, and yeah. And we think, yes, I've made the adjustments. Now it's all good. I'm getting the higher taste. Everything's good. But guess what? It's going to shift. It's the way. It's always going to shift. And we have to keep making adjustments. And that's the game. That's the game, to keep making the adjustment. Just like if you're crossing the water, I've never been a sailor, but I've heard these examples. If you're a sailor and you're sailing a small boat, you have to be constantly aware and conscious. And what to speak if you're flying an airplane? They say any like that. If you're driving a car, if you're going anywhere, it appears that you're just sitting there. You'd say, I'll go back from the boat to the plane to the car. Most of us sit in cars more than boats and planes. So if you're sitting there, it appears that you're just sitting. You're just sitting. You just sort of somehow you're moving a little bit, especially if you're on a motorway or something. You're just hardly moving your arms. But the fact is, you're off course 99% of the time. Why? Because you're always making little adjustments, just a little here, a little there, left, right, left, right, left, right, like that, to keep on center. So that is the way that we have to be constantly aware, so that we can make sure, am I getting the higher taste? If I'm not, make the adjustment, so that we can continue, because that is the way. So one must learn to tolerate this happiness and distress, and not to chase it. What time have we got? I think I'll maybe finish in a moment. So if you have any, what do they call? Reflections, anything I've said. So in a few minutes I'll stop, and then if you have any reflections, anything that's piqued your interest in the verses that we've been discussing, then something that you might carry forward in the day or your life, then just reflect it back in a few words or a sentence or so, and then we can maybe see if it will broaden the conversation. Just put that in the chat box and we can see what's there. Let me see, where was I going with that one? We were just finishing that and thinking. I've got another noise to fill my little brain again. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and the disappearance in due course. Yes, so that, yeah, the idea of chasing happiness. Krishna is trying to get us to understand that due to our past karmas, past activities, we will have a certain amount of happiness to experience in this life. There'll be a certain amount of beauty, there'll be a certain amount of wealth, there'll be a certain amount of distress. All these things are already settled up. We can increase are suffering by sinful activities. That is the fact. It can be the suffering, vikarmic activities can increase our suffering. But more or less, everything is settled up. If we don't increase, so much, then we'll get a certain amount of happiness and distress. And Srila Prabhupada gave the example. He said that you can have so many persons endeavoring to become millionaires, and maybe one or two out of so many thousands of people will do that, become a millionaire. And some people, so why is that? Why is it that some become, and somebody will say, because they worked harder, they were more diligent, etc., became more expert. But some people don't even endeavor at all, and practically money falls on their lap. It's just the way of it. I was just relating this to a few months back. One of the men down at the land that we have down in Thames area, he runs a paint shop. He's the owner of the shop, and he was explaining. He said, "Oh, they're great." I said, "How did you go?" He said, "Oh, great. The people were just coming in and giving me money." He said, "I made so much money," and he wasn't boasting. He was just the kind of man. He's a nice man. He said, basically, he was saying it was just people were just coming in the door, taking up big buckets, big 10, 20-liter pails of paint, and off they go. And he was thousands of dollars he got on that day, and he said it's been like that for months and months. So it's just all falling on his lap, and somebody else is working so hard and can't get ahead. So if we pause for a little bit, and we'll see that's the nature of the world. So the pursuit of happiness, especially through sense gratification, thinking that by connecting the senses more and more to sense gratification, no, the happiness will come of its own accord, and the distress will follow it. But don't worry, the distress will disappear, and then happiness will reappear. So this is the way of the world, happiness and distress. It appears from sense perception, and one has to learn to tolerate them, and tolerate them by getting a higher taste. One will not be chasing those things, thinking that will bring the pleasure, and then one will be able to stay fixed. Vyavasayatmika buddhya. The intelligence will become fixed. Keep Krishna in the center. Return to the center. Keep Krishna at the center. The happiness will come. The happiness will go. The sense gratification will come and it will go. But I am experiencing that. I'm not disturbed. Mahavishnu Maharaj gave a fabulous statement. He said, happiness, this is just to tweak it, just to refine that. He said, happiness, when it comes, should be enjoyed, the happiness, drop by drop. So you get a certain amount, you shouldn't enjoy it, he explained, just in small drops. Why? Because it's intoxicant. It's an intoxicant. So an intoxicant, if somebody takes, I'm not suggesting you do or we do, but if you take an intoxicant, then if you take it, it will just completely become totally intoxicating. So he says that happiness is intoxicating. We're so desirous of it. So be careful when the happiness comes, take it slowly, little drop at a time of the happiness. Don't become elated, because you must know that distress is going to come. And if you become elated when happiness comes, you're going to get dumped when it disappears, and you're going to get dumped. So that's the idea, to become equipoised, to tolerate, so that we're not buffeted and we can stay on that focused. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child, Bahu Shaka, Krishna says to Arjuna, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is Bahu Shaka, which means many branched. So that's the way of the world. You want happiness? Yeah, here it is. Oh, you didn't last too long. Here, try that, try this, try this, try that. Is many branched. And we think, yes, happiness, happiness, happiness. I'll chase this and chase that. Now I'll go for this. Now I'll go for that. And we're thinking this is wonderful. But it will take us to the end of our life, and with no purpose, like a dog chasing its tail, running here, running there. So I'm just going to check if there is anything in the chat box. I'll just see if there's something in there. Okay. So we've got something here. I'm just going to see if it, oh gosh. So I touched it and it disappeared. Oh, now it's going to come up. Oh my gosh. Here we go. Hopefully. I'm not very wonderful at that. It's come up there. How do I get it? Hide. I'll hide it. Sorry, because I can't read it up there. I can only read it here. I'll explain it. I think it's Amiyatma Prabhu. Try and scroll. Oh gosh, I can't see the name. I think it's Amiyatma Prabhu. Hare Krishna Amiyatma. I think it's Shuddha Prabhu. I'll just read what's there. I won't read it out until I've read it, I suppose. I was reflecting. Okay, his reflection was, I was reflecting how in this Western culture, tolerance and adjustment are not so much developed, whereas in older India, these qualities, I love the way you've said older India, these qualities were strongly cultivated. The simple environment demanded it. Wow, so nicely stated, Prabhu. Wow, so maybe we should have a simple environment which will demand that we become more tolerant. You can take it all the way back, can't you? And yes, so that's a great reflection that certainly is the Eastern cultures, especially in older India, and even today, although I get fully what you're saying, you know, modern India is trying to replicate the West in so many ways, more and more and more. Still, the tipping point is tipped a lot, but still you can see that, especially if you go out into villages. I think it was one, Devaki Mataji, she was just here in Auckland, and she was sharing how in one of her classes, how she spends a fair bit of time in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh, she said, it's been pretty much, what would you say, frozen in time to a greater extent than even India. Anyway, I won't get into the details of all that. There's obviously a whole governmental and social reasons and how that happens. But she was saying how it's such a great place for seeing this simple environment and how people can live in a very tolerant way, in a very nice way, in a very simple way. And we're thinking with all our complexity of the modern world, it's all developed to try to ameliorate the difficulties that we face. But Bhagavatam and all the Shastra explains that the only way to get freed from all these sufferings of material world, I think it's the second canto towards the very beginning, it says, Anarto Pashamam Shakshad Bhakti Yoga Adhoksije, that by the linking process of devotional service, all the miseries of the living entity, which are actually superfluous to him. He's not supposed to suffer all these complexities and the miseries of material life more and more. They can be directly mitigated by this linking process of devotional service. But the massive people don't know this. So that's the Western culture, and it's stretching all over the world now, the monoculture of gross materialism. They don't realize this, so they go here and there and try this and that and make it more and more and more complicated and binding every one of us more and more by the shackles of material illusion. So such a job that has to be done. Krishna's got his plan, though. I think Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, I was listening to last night, he was getting interviewed and he was asked, what does he see for the future? And I was thinking, and I listened, and it was nice. Gosh, I had it all in my head now, and I've told you that now. I can't remember what he said. Gosh, it's the Kali Yuga, but he was explaining quite nicely. Yeah, you know, I won't get into the whole thing, but you know, that Krishna has his plan, and he explained this. It does come to mind. One of the key things he was talking about is 3 levels of Krishna consciousness, and he was very nice. He explained that we have the institutional and institution, the temples, and the the rituals and so on is one level. And then the second level of Krishna consciousness, he was explaining, was the process. So you have the external, and he connected it to Kanista Adhikari. That level is, you may not get so seriously into the process of strict sadhana or fully dedicated sadhana. So, but you're attracted to the programs and a bit of chanting and a bit of kirtan and so on. It's wonderful. But the next level is the process of Krishna consciousness as delineated by the great acharyas, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, pretty much. It says intense practice or full practice, full fixed. So that's the next level of the process. So you've got the institution and the rituals and the activities, and you've got at a deeper level, you've got the process of devotional service and a very strong execution of those practices. And the deepening and deepening of those processes will take us to the full sambandha, the connection with the Lord in a very deep, meaningful way, where that is our life and soul. So that was the third level, and he explained a bit more about that level, but you can get the idea, the sense is there, the sense of it. So Western tolerance and adjustment are not so much developed, whereas in our older India, these qualities were strongly cultivated. So the simple environment demands it. So the more simple we can make things, the better. And it's Maya's trick, or Maya's business, is to show us, no, the more complicated we make it, the better. If we just get this new app, if we get this new device, if we get it on it goes, the more complex. And it's Maya's so wonderful. It appears like we're talking on this this medium now, and it's and again, that was Srila Prabhupada's mood. Srila Prabhupada's mood is technology, I will utilize it for spreading Krishna consciousness. If there was no if we didn't have technology, cars and factories, Prabhupada said, we won't produce them. We won't go there. But if they're there, then you can be utilized, and practically have to be utilized, because it's such a shambles, the way all this complexity is made in the world. You can hardly function without utilizing some of the complexity. But we're not meant for that. I watched another little video last night. It was Bhakti Vikash Maharaj, and he's got a program in India, a farm project, and it's so simple. He's got a Gurukul there, and a lot of his devotees in the cities. He's got so many nice disciples and well-established people, and they're utilizing their funds to develop a rural community, beautiful place, but very, very simple, and just the beginnings. But he's got a Gurukula there, and all the rest of it. They're planting trees and crops and all the rest of it. And again, showing that was Prabhupada's desire, to show this simple way of life, which is dependent on Krishna, and that we actually can be very happy. I believe it's amazing. That is, yeah, I could talk. We won't go into it fully. But thank you so much for your. I wish I knew how to get you to be able to speak. I'll most likely see. I'll see if I can follow through on that and gradually get my complexity so that I can serve the devotees. That's what I need to learn to do. So thanks for your comment, Amiyatma Prabhu. I'll just check. Okay, so I'm going to finish at that point. Thank you very much for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you again, and stay with Bhagavad Gita. It's such a wonderful, wonderful gift from His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, giving us Bhagavad Gita as it is. Jai. Hare Krishna Prabhus. Hare Krishna.